Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to our first book club of the year. This last month, I have been doing a lot of reading, preparing for all the different offerings that I have here on Patreon. And I'm just so excited to present this book to you. This is one of my favorite books. It's a book that just constantly inspires me in my work. Hofzinser. And my new deck Emanations, which is coming out soon on Kickstarter. The gaffs in there and a lot of the thinking behind the deck is related to Hofzinser. So I wanted to talk about this book. And talk about Hofzinser in general. Hofzinser was, without doubt, the most famous magician of his time in his part of the world. He was a legend, and he didn't really perform for the public. He didn't have public shows. I believe the way his shows started were, he was a member of the aristocracy. He was an aristocracy. Sorry, my English isn't very good. Anyways, he was very high socially in his time and in his the place that he lived, and he never really had to perform for a living like most magicians. He had a regular job. He worked for the government, I believe, and he made a lot of money. And the way his shows started is he would perform at parties, parties that he was invited to anyways. He wasn't going there as a performer. He was just a high, he was just in high society, and he was being invited to these parties, and he would perform, and people would do. They would have these little salon shows where people would play music, and there would be different art exhibited. And soon he started performing all around Vienna, and finally started his own salon, and it became legendary. He had a show called An Hour of Deception, and it was just probably the most legendary show in magic. I want to go through how this book came to be. So even though Hofzinser was extremely famous in his time and very highly regarded as a great, great artist, both by magicians who lived in that time and just generally in public, he was forgotten after he died. He actually died pretty poor. I don't know the full story. I know that Magic Christian did a lot of research, but I believe he contracted some sort of disease in his later life, and it just went downhill. He died poor, and his wife died without much money, or she would have died without much money. She got remarried to another rich gentleman, and I think she did all right. But we would have not known about Hofzinser per se if it weren't for a few people who sort of carried on his legacy. His magic was so great that magicians of that time and who came after copied his magic and borrowed elements of his magic. So Robert Houdin, for instance, performed some pieces from Hofzinser's show. We don't know if he performed it exactly the way Hofzinser performed it, but we know that for a fact, Robert Houdin got some of his material from Hofzinser. When Hofzinser died, the story is that he asked his wife to destroy everything, all his magic, everything, which is, there's different stories that have come out subsequently, but that is sort of the story that has, been going around for a very long time, and the that's that's what Ottokar Fischer writes, which is weird because there's more to the story that's in this book. There's more history that's been uncovered that Magic Christian, who is like just the foremost researcher on Hofzinser, he's sort of debunked some of that. But that is not the subject of what we're talking about today. Today, I just want to focus on this book and how it came into being. So Hofzinser had a few students. Those students had some copies of his props, and some people even believe some of the original props from Hofzinser's show. For example, there is a sort of a coin box, or I don't know what you call it. Yeah, I guess you'd call it a coin box, and some coins, and they are engraved. They're silver, and they're engraved with his monogram. And different people speculate that why would the students of Hofzinser's have Hofzinser's monogram on their set of coins? But there are some props that were not destroyed. That we do know, and Ottokar Fischer knows this, and he writes about it in this book, and he's sort of trying to trace it down. This short section, sort of before we get into the content of the actual book, is just the history of this book. And we really have to thank Ottokar Fischer. Ottokar Fischer, I don't know where he's from. I believe he lived in Berlin, but I'm not too sure where he was born. But Ottokar Fischer was a magic historian. He's known for writing a few books on magic, excellent books. Illustrated Magic, or is it Illustrated History of Magic? Anyways, he wrote a few books on magic. Very, very smart guy, very just intelligent. When you read Ottokar Fischer's writing, you sort of get that he knew magic. And he knew about Hofzinser, and he would contact different people and try to collect things. So because of Ottokar Fischer, pretty much because of Ottokar Fischer, we have this book. Ottokar Fischer just collected all these, things from correspondence, from little letters and things that Hofzinser wrote, and he just put this book together of his magic with writings from, just tons of different sources. He sort of built this book, and it was originally published in German, I believe in 1931. Don't quote me on that, but I think 1931 as Kartenkunst, which means, I guess, magic wizard or card wizard, something like that. It's in German. My German isn't very, very good. But that is where Hofzinser originally, published a lot of this material. Although I believe some of it also appeared in the Sphinx. I'm not too sure what came first. I'm guessing it probably came into the Sphinx first, but it must have been translated differently because this is a different translation. This book has a weird history behind it. I know that S.H. Sharpe was behind it, and so it's weird. So this was first published by George Johnson, who had a magic company called the Magic Wand, and they published magic books in that time span, like the 1920s, 30s, and I don't know if that would be technically out of copyright. And then Carl Folves put out an edition with Dover, but also S.H. Sharpe is very involved in this version of the book. And I remember there being some trouble that came up with this being published or republished by Dover. I remember it had something to do with Carl Falves, but I'm not too sure on the details. Carl Falves is one of those guys in Magic whose name is everywhere, but nobody really knows him. I only know, I think, one or two people who know Carl Falves, and Carl Falves apparently doesn't talk to anybody. So I don't know if we'll ever hear the full story, but he's not really important, to be honest, Carl Falves. Uh, I would say the most important people here are Ottokar Fischer and Hofzinser for this book. Um, Ottokar Fischer, by the way, although he was, great magician, he does give some weird advice in this book uh, as how to present some of Hofzinser's card magic, and some of it is weird. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that, but it does have great material. I want to go through the material in this book to try to, capture what Hofzinser's magic was like. His magic was just totally unique. You have to imagine when he opened his salon in Vienna that there was never a show like this. People would come into the salon, and Hofzinser and his wife would be there. His wife would do her part of the show, would be doing sort of mind reading demonstrations, as that was very popular at that time. It's sort of like the classic, I think, second sight act, where I believe she was blindfolded and reading people's minds, divining things in their pockets, and similar effects. But just to, it's kind of hard to sort of describe the essence of this show. I mean, just imagine going into a salon and it's only rich people there. The price of a ticket was the equivalent of most people, of the average person's salary for a year. So just think about what an average person, an average citizen salary in society is. Just think about what that is. I don't know what it is technically, but I would estimate in Canada and in the US, it's in between uh, 25 to 50,000. I'm not too sure where it is in between that, the average, but and I'm sure it was similar in Vienna. I mean, I don't know how the inflation works, 200 years ago, but just think about how much money that is for a single ticket to go see a show. So it was like you had to have a lot of money, you had to have connections, you had to be somebody to see Hofzinser. You couldn't just, it wasn't just like going to see a concert. It wasn't like going to, wherever. It was an exclusive event. I think it would be the equivalent today, and there are restaurants like this where it's, I don't know, $15,000 for a meal. Like, no joke. There's restaurants in the world where it's $15,000 for a meal, and it's like a world famous restaurant, and there's a waiting list that is 2-3 years. There are restaurants that exist like this in the world. And so that's sort of what I would imagine that experience being like. I've never been to any of these restaurants, but I actually know a few people who have been to restaurants like that. And, they've told me about that experience. To me, it's such an extravagant amount of money. I don't think I could ever. Yeah, I can't even really imagine paying that much for a meal, but think about paying that much for a show. You're paying that much to go see a magic show. It sort of really gives you an appreciation for who Hofzinser was and the power that he had at that time. I don't think anybody could really charge that much today. I mean, I think about all the magicians in the world. I don't think anybody could get away with charging that much today, but he did it. and it was just incredible. He just held himself as a high artist, and he was considered a high artist, the highest artist in society in that time. Hofzinser wasn't considered to be a magician. I mean, he was a magician, but the people saw him as this grand artist, literally the greatest artist in Vienna at that time. So if you think about it like that, you sort of can grasp, although it's still hard to grasp, the level of where Hofzinser was in that society. Um, it really is remarkable. But yeah, the only thing I could compare it to is those restaurants that I'm telling you about, or maybe if it's like a world class, like the best in the world, orchestra player, violinist, pianist, literally the best in the world, maybe they could charge a rate like that to do a private small show for 30 people or so. And they could actually charge that much. And it would be extremely exclusive. It's just, like for me, I need to explain that because it's so important when we're thinking about Hofzinser that we really do need to consider the level of where he was performing at. And if you can imagine the salon where he was performing, I'm sure it was lavish. The most beautiful carved tables, most beautiful curtains, the most beautiful chairs, just everything must have been beautiful. And it just must have been like a really luxurious experience. That's sort of how I imagine it, reading this book and piecing it together. I mean, for that price, you sort of got to deliver on that luxury. So this book, I just want to read a few lines. So the newspapers outdid each other in voicing their praises and proclaimed a Hofzinser soiree far superior to all musical and theatrical enjoyments. In short, the Salon Hofzinser was one of the social and artistic centers, and it was practically obligatory for every member of society to have visited these soirees. So if you were anyone in society, you had it was a must. Like if you haven't been to these, then it's like, you really are missing out. So I mean, just so that you guys understand the magic that he did. Before I describe some of the effects, although I should, some of the most beautiful effects that have ever appeared, I want to, if I can find it, I want to read you some of the books that didn't make it in the, some of the tricks that didn't make it in the book, but are, were Hofzinser's magic. So the rose mirror, the floating wand, the wandering coins, the butterflies, the ink of the enamored, the protocol of knots, the recollection of a finger, the spiritist, the word, the sympathetical influence, the lantern of Diogenes, the rose tree and card, the frame for cards, the card star with crystal dial hand, the crystal ball casket, the dial with cards, the ducats, the delicate theme, the enchanted bank bills, the grandfather, the corresponding watches, the dial with flowers, a mathematical example, the library, the album of poetry, the bird sword, the thought of photograph, the wreath of flowers in the hat, diabolical variations with a 9-pin, the exchange spectacular, the billiard balls, the box of flowers, the changement in onlookers' hands, the magical bell, the toast, the coffee trick. So these books, these tricks, although this book focuses on his card work, if you want to find out more about these tricks, you can find them in Conjurer's Magic Monthly. It was called Conjurer's Monthly Magazine, and that is a magazine from the 1900s. I believe it started in 1907. That was published by Harry Houdini. Houdini was the editor, and so you might want to check that out just as a reference. Conjurer's Magic Monthly, if you want to find an original, it's very hard to find, but you can find a PDF of the whole magazine at the Conjuring Arts Research Center online store. You can buy it as a PDF. It really is worth it. I don't know how much it is. Actually, I check for you. Conjurer's Magic Monthly. Oh wow! So, so to get this magazine, it's a PDF. It's $20 from Conjuring Arts. $20 for the magazine. I really think it's worth it. It's a great magazine. It's got a lot of reviews and tricks and just all sorts of stuff. It's great. All right. So the book itself. Before we get into the book itself, as I said, ignore Ottokar Fischer's advice on how to perform these pieces. They're not really useful. He's like, oh, well, you should, use 4 routines that have unprepared cards, and then you should use, whatever amount of routines that have prepared cards, and you should, do it like this. And it's sort of very specific, unasked for advice. It's interesting. Okay, so the book is split up into a few different sections, and it's not a big book. It's just under 200 pages, if I'm not mistaken. The first part of the book is the preface, a biography of Hofzinser. It's actually a pretty well written biography, in my opinion, and the guide to performance, which is unnecessary, but always take what you can out of these things. And then you go into the actual book, and it's split up into, as I said, a few sections. So there's experiments, and experiments are always tricks, but experiments with unprepared cards, experiments with duplicate unprepared cards, experiments with double-sided cards, experiments with prearranged packs, experiments with divided cards, and experiments with differently prepared cards, experiments with the application of transparent cards, experiments with mechanical apparatus. And then after that, you have a section that's called card problems, which we might get into later. There's a lot of really classic tricks here that you won't recognize the names. Like if I say the first trick in the book, the sympathetic numbers, you won't recognize that name. You'll be like, what? The sympathetic numbers? I have no idea what that trick is. Probably you do, though. That is a very classic trick, a very famous trick now, popularized recently by Juan Tamariz, and you have also probably seen Danny D'Ortiz perform it, and it is a trick. If you've ever seen Danny D'Ortiz He usually does this near the beginning of the show, where he has a bunch of cards on the table, and then he starts dealing out cards. He says, "Say stop whenever you want." They say stop, and then he says, "Watch, count how many cards you have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10." And then he snaps his finger, and then those 4 cards that are laid off on the table, he turns them over one at a time, and there's a 10, a 10, a 10, and a 10. And then he says, "Look, maybe, maybe, uh, maybe you're wondering what would happen if it was another number. Say stop whenever you want." He starts taking cards away. 1, 2, 3, stop. And then there's 7 cards left. They count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Watch, 7. No, 6? No, 7. And then he snaps his finger again, and he waves, and then all the 4 cards are all now 7s instead of 10s. So that is a very classic trick called sympathy. Danny Ortiz obviously has his own method of doing it. Juan Tamariz has his own method of doing it, his own style. All of their routines are very different than the original Hofzinser. Like, they add things and they take things away, and they sort of create their own, own thing from it. But the original is in this book, and it's a great routine. And it's actually what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. So we'll hear, for the people in the studies of magic group, we will go into that routine tomorrow and just go through the whole routine. But you probably won't recognize the name of any of these tricks: the power of faith, the 4 kings, domination of thought, remember and forget, the married hearts, the queen of hearts, the mysterious pack of cards, everywhere and nowhere, lost, stolen, or strayed, a king, the ace of hearts. Like, you probably won't know these tricks by their names. There's a bunch of tricks with, names that you won't necessarily recognize. But when you read it, you may recognize them. And if you don't recognize them and you read them, you realize the plot itself is beautiful and worth pursuing. And I want to, before I, go through the tricks, or at least some of the tricks, I just want to talk about Hofzinser's general style of performing. It was really beautiful, and he told stories, and they were poetic stories. Every single card piece that he did contained a form of poetry. His patter, his speech, his script was just poetic. There was inherent drama in it, not only in the cards, but in everything. So a lot of people don't know this. I didn't know it. Hofzinser was either the first or one of the first people to do a routine that we now know as the miser's dream, that classic dream where the person has a coin pail and they're reaching in the air and dropping a coin in, reaching in the air, producing a coin, dropping the coin into a pail, and keep doing that until the pail is like full. Hofzinser, as I said, either was the first or one of the first. And he wouldn't just perform it. Obviously, it's beautiful in itself, and it's been done silently or to music or, with jokes. But Hofzinser would always tell stories with his magic. So in his story for this, it was quite beautiful. It was I don't remember the whole script, but the story was about a banker, a guy, a financer, like an entrepreneur guy who invests in different projects, and he was very successful making money and very, very famous. Like, I think today you could compare him to, like, I don't know, like maybe it's hard today because we're so tech oriented, but like an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or someone like that. Just someone who has, like, just somebody who sees things that other people don't see, different trends, and they're able to act on them. And So the story was about him, and uh, he's being asked, how is it that you're always able to be correct? How is it that you're always able to make money when everybody else is losing money, speculating here and there? And the answer that he gives, which is, a part of the script of the routine, is that I saw the money in the air and I just reached out and grabbed it. People ask me how I make all this money. I just see it and I reach out and grab it. And so that, like, just that concept, that beautiful, brilliant little touch, that idea is from Hofzinser. And apparently the story he tells is from a real guy who lived in that time. And you can find out more of the details from Ottokar Fischer. But that is sort of the level of where Hofzinser was thinking and talking. Everything was a metaphor. Everything came together. Nothing was just like, random card trick or random magic trick. All of his stories, all of his presentations alluded to some form of life. In sympathetic numbers, which we'll study tomorrow, he opens a trick and he says, he opens it as a question. I don't know exactly how he opens, but it's a question as to who in society has better intuition, the women in the audience or the men? Who would you say has a better intuition? And probably not. Probably Hofzinser did not talk like we have. Has a very different way of presenting. And then I actually in my own show read. I actually use the script almost exactly like him. I remove a line, so I have to read the first two lines and then I'll know it. At a time when the human mind, so extremely productive of wonderful inventions, but unfortunately also of deceptions, has reached the culmination point, I beg to submit a question. Do you believe that I can give you, in concrete form, your own thought even before you yourself are conscious of it? The audience answers, no, and yet sometimes it is possible. I will write down a few words. Just say stop whenever you want as I throw these cards down. Okay, so this is just brilliant. This is just brilliant. Just the whole way. We'll talk about this tomorrow. And this is crazy. Literally, there's just 2 pages to talk about this whole trick, and I can talk about it for hours because there's so much jam packed in here. From that beginning story of asking who has better intuition, making the women in the audience go against the men, and then having, a woman say stop, and having the men select different cards, and doing this whole procedure and involving them into this drama is just very brilliant. As you'll see tomorrow, as I go through the routine, this specific routine, I could talk about for hours. And but all of his magic was like that. It was very much related to his audience and to people in general. It was never just about, it was just never about like, oh, nothing was ever trivial. For example, one of his most famous tricks, Everywhere and Nowhere, it's just beautiful. It and the whole routine is beautiful, but the presentation, the story, when he's talking about it, it's a man who wants to get everywhere in life. He wants to go everywhere. And he tries so hard to get everywhere in life, and he ends up nowhere. And it's the name of the trick, but it's a story in the trick, and the card in the trick that represents that man. It's a tragic story, but it's just beautiful. It captures it. It adds drama, and it allows you to tell a story and make movements with the cards. While telling a story, we often forget about storytelling and magic. It's sort of storytelling in magic has sort of reached like a really cheesy point. Probably the only person who's done it very well recently was Rene Levin. Rene Levin could tell stories doing magic, and it would make sense, and it would be beautiful. Like his story, I know them, but I don't know how I know them, or uh, the one armed gambler, that story from Rene Levin, or his story on when he's doing the wild card routine about it. It's there's just so you can tell stories in a beautiful way. Ascanio is another one. Ascanio with his Aces with Love routine, his Ace Assembly. Ace Assembly is sort of like a pointless plot in itself. It's like, you know, people have been sort of brainwashed to not tell stories because they're just going to be cheesy. But Ascanio really built a beautiful story, and it's about life and a family. This is not. What do you see here? These are four aces. No, they're not four aces. I mean, they are, but they're much more than four aces. They're a family of aces. You see this one? He's the little black pearl, the little club, the one with the little coconut head. And here's the heart, and here's the diamond, and this big one over here. This is the father ace. He's the biggest. He's the strongest. We'll put him over here. And every single one of the sons goes their own way. One over here, one over here, and one over here. And they're always separated. There's a line that keeps them together, but they're always separated. They never get back together. And we put these three cards on top of each one. These three cards are not only three cards, they are three cards, but they're not only three cards. These three cards represent new occupations, new commitments, and new friendships. And like a weight, they hold down each one of the aces. This one also has new occupations, new friendships, new commitments. This one over here, occupations, friendships, commitments. And the father also has a new occupation, new friendships, and new commitments. But unlike the sons, he doesn't get weighed down by them. He's on top of his problems. He's on top of his problems. And Ascanio goes through this beautiful story of it's like the aces are aces, but the whole story is about this family coming back together after being separated. And it's just a wonderful, powerful story. It's quite a beautiful story. And we sort of forget about the storytelling in magic today because of just, I think we've seen people do it very poorly. I don't want to criticize anybody, but I've seen, many magicians try to tell stories doing magic, and it's really, cheesy. But Hofzinser reminds us that it doesn't have to be. Another one of his effects that's in this book, remember and forget. So the remember and forget plot, just to summarize it briefly, you have a card. You have three spectators. There's different versions of it, mind you, but just a basic version of it. There's three spectators, and you each give them two cards. They shuffle them back and forth, and you tell them to remember one of the cards and to forget the other card. To look at it, remember one and forget the other. And we're gonna lose the cards in the deck, and then he tells a story about, and he finds the cards and does all that stuff, but he tells a story about a man who's in love, but he's been in love with more than one woman. He's in love with two women, and there's one that he's trying to remember, the one that he's with. There's one that he's trying to forget, but he can't forget because she's still in his memory. And the more he tries to forget, the more he remembers. And the whole play, when you read the book and you see the routine, it's extremely beautiful and powerful because you realize that the spectators realize that those cards are those people in the story, and the people hearing the story can relate to the story because the stories in the show are about the cards, but they're about people, and the people see the card magic not only, not only for the effect, but they pay attention and they're emotionally involved, and they're just engaged because of that connection. And Hofzinser's magic is all like this, and every single piece has a different mood. There's different emotions that you get as you do his magic. There is hope, there's hopelessness, there's joy, there's sadness, there's anger, there's humor, there's just everything you could possibly imagine through the stories that he conjures up with his storytelling. It really is. It really is quite remarkable, just how much he was able to put into this book. And by that, I mean Ottokar Fischer, who did all this research. It's not easy to do. And also, one thing that you do have to realize when you read this book is that the translation is pretty good, but it's lacking in some areas. So after you do read this book, you should try to look at the original German and try to figure out the meaning of some of the poetry and some of the jokes, because some things don't translate. For example, in the trick, in the sympathetic numbers trick. Hold on, I gotta tell my dog to go down. Think about it. Down. Good. See? Down. In the sympathetic numbers trick. Oh, that didn't last long. Sympathetic numbers trick. So the trick ends with them all getting the same card, tens, and then there's also 10 cards that have been, dealt down onto the table, and then at the end of the trick, he says, "Okay, then 10 is the sympathetic number. But what should I have done if the gentleman had only drawn 8 spots?" And then there's no answer. "Then I should have permitted myself to count the lady's eyes as 2 spots, and my trick would have gained an additional pleasing feature." I guess technically, like, I understand what. So he's saying, what would have happened if one of the gentlemen had only drawn eight spots, like 8, a card with 8 pips. What what would have happened? Well, Hofzinser is saying, well, I would have counted the lady's 2 eyes as 2 spots in my trick, and it would have gained an additional pleasing feature. Like, you can tell that the translation is lacking something. It makes sense. The concept makes sense. Like, oh, the lady's two eyes are filling in for the pips, and you can tell that the way Hofzinser is saying it must be a very clever pun or something like that in German, but it just doesn't translate into English. And I personally have no idea, how to properly translate that pun. And when I've performed personally, I've always left it out because the line itself doesn't make sense in English. Like, if you say it, it's like, huh? Like, you would have it would take so long to explain the concept that you're just sort of better off leaving it out. What else do I want to talk about in this book? So it is very cool. The tricks with unprepared cards are amazing. They are very difficult. The structure, the way things are structured here, here's how I would approach this book. I read this book. you can probably find a copy of this book used. You won't find a new one, but you can find a used copy of this book and work through the book first by yourself. That's what I've done. That's what I'm continuing to do. And then when I feel ready, and only when I feel ready, will I move on to just drop my bookmark. Only then would I move on to working on the Magic Christians books on Hofzinser. And the reason why I say that is I personally, seeing Danny D'Arty's version of Hofzinser's trick, seeing, Juan Tamari's version of the sympathy trick and different tricks from Hofzinser as well. Both those guys, Miguel Angel Gaya, Magic Christian, there's quite a few magicians who have played with Hofzinser's tricks. They always change them. Read the original, understand the concept for yourself, really just do it for yourself, and then look out to other sources. I think that is the best way to approach Hofzinser. That's the most pure way, and that's why I would read this the subpar track. By the way, this is not, the translation here isn't so bad. If you want to read a really bad translation, you can look at when it was originally translated as a serial in the old Magic magazines. I think it was Conjurers, but I think it was also in the Sphinx. I don't know. The point is, there are some bad translations of these. This is not the worst. This is a pretty good one, but I would start here just because it can give you a pure idea of the effect, and then you can work on it from there. Some of the tricks use regular cards, and some of the tricks do not use regular cards. And some of the tricks, so the tricks that, by the way, sometimes Hofzinser used 52 cards. Sometimes he only used 30 cards. Or 32 cards. That was a standard thing for magicians back in the day, to only use 32 cards. The only person who I've seen do that recently is, again, René Levant. René Levant he had a concept that he called the half pack, where René Levant would always work with a stack, and the deck would be in stack at the beginning of the show. And as he's performing the show, different tricks. I mean, there's an order to the show. Different tricks would be used with the order, and then as the order gets out of place, he only uses half the deck. So then one half of the deck, he'll just cut half the deck on the side and then only use around half the deck, 30 cards, 26 cards, whatever, hold it in his hand, and then perform magic like this. The audience will be able to shuffle. He'll be able to shuffle fairly. The cards can really be mixed. And then anytime he wants, he can bring that pack with the rest of the deck, do a false shuffle, and then continue using his half pack, his stacked half of the deck. It's a very interesting concept. Hofzinser Hofzinser often uses around half the deck as well, 32 cards. So it's just something to think about. If you are serious about designing your show, your set, to have a working order, definitely study Hofzinser and study René Levant and sort of understand that concept for yourself, because there's really not many people using that concept. I know that Juan Tamariz talks a little bit about it in his book Mnemonica, because he works sometimes with half of a stacked deck, or there's some tricks that you can do from Mnemonica with only half the deck stacked. But definitely, keep it considered, in your mind. Okay, so there's tricks that don't use there's tricks that don't use special cards but use duplicates. Also another thing about Hofzinser's time and his tricks, his cards didn't have indexes on them, just like my cards don't have indexes on them. They do facilitate some of the tricks in the book. As you read the book, you will come to understand this. It really is hard to explain to people. You sort of have to go like, piece by piece to explain to people why this is the way it is, and why it matters. But it's an old solution that I also believe can solve modern problems. For example, let's say you're doing, and this is not in the book, but let's say you were doing an 8-card oil and water, and it was on video, okay? Many of those routines, if you were to perform them on video, if someone were to rewind that video and to keep track of all the cards' positions, they would be able, through looking at the video, to realize that there's, let's say you're using an extra card that you had at the beginning of the trick 1 7, 2 9s, and an 8, and now you have 2 9s, 1 8, and 1 7. You know what I mean? Like people can realize that from video, whereas if you don't have indexes, all those discrepancies melt because people don't need to see the whole card and they can't count the whole card. All they see is the color and sort of an idea of what the card is when the cards are spread, because the number that's in the index is not critical to the actual effect. It actually has nothing to do with the effect for many card effects. So there are discrepancies that you will realize in some of these tricks that just totally get eliminated, and also different stacks that just totally get eliminated from the lack of indexes. The indexes, just an interesting thing about the lack of indexes, it allows you to use, I remember reading about the history of stacked decks, and I remember seeing some of the earlier stacks, and I was thinking to myself, how could this stack possibly fool anyone? This is the most obvious stack in the world when you think about it. When you see them talk about the stack, the way that the cards are prearranged, you think, how's this fooling anyone? Then I realized they're using cards that don't have indexes. You can have the deck stacked in virtually any order, spread the deck, and no one can see that it's stacked because that information is in the corner. So you could have a repeating pattern. The repeating pattern might be like 4 or 5 cards long. It's super obvious if you're using, a regular deck of cards. And that is totally invisible with a deck without indexes. Another thing, there's a great trick called 1 in a Billion by Danny Ray. It's in the Ascanio book. I think it's in volume 2. And it's a trick that I liked for a very long time, but I had a problem with it. So you have 2 packs of cards and you're flipping cards, and when the spectator says stop, the 2 cards are matching. Well, that's technically not. The spectator doesn't say stop. It's marked off. Anyways, a location in one of the packs is marked off with a card that's diagonal to the other cards, and then you are, dealing the cards simultaneously. And I never liked that routine because there was a discrepancy where it was a repeating pattern in both the packets, but one of the packets was like 3 cards off. And I was like, this is too obvious. When I was performing it for people, some people would notice that there's a repeating pattern, and I just didn't like it. And then I played with it with my deck without indexes, and I realized that discrepancy disappears. There's nobody who can realize what they're seeing when you are perform, when you're doing it at that level. So just something to think about. It really does change things up. So another thing with duplicate cards, I've never been caught. I don't think I've ever been caught. And I use duplicate cards in my show and in a few of my routines. But there is a sense of worry for me at times when I am using duplicate cards, because just some of the ways my set is designed, there's certain moments in that set where I'm vulnerable. Like I'm spreading the deck face up, and it could, it's very rare that it happens, but it could happen that those two duplicates end up right beside each other after I'm, you know, when I don't need them together, and an audience member could see it. Without indexes, that doesn't happen. You could have any card together, and unless it's a court card where they really see that picture together and it's literally like the same, and they're staring at it's going to fly by them. You can literally use any number card in the deck as a duplicate, and no one's going to be able to find it. Like nobody, unless those two cards are face up on the table at the same time. And then somebody might be like, "Huh, what? There's two of these." But other than that, like, people will not retain it because they don't have information as easily. They would have to count, the pips on the cards to be able to be like, oh, that's a seven of diamonds. And then like 5 cards later, oh, that's another 7 of diamonds. When they're just seeing a card, cards being flipped over, they're not processing it unless it's directly involved with their trick. So it's something to keep in mind with the duplicate cards that are also used in this book. He has versions of Everywhere and Nowhere with the duplicate cards. All the tricks are pretty awesome. Like, I think everybody should choose a trick from Hofzinser and add it to the material. Any trick you like, add it to your set, and your set will get better. Great tricks. There is some tricks that are harder to do. You won't be able to do them with my cards. You'll have to get gaffs from like bicycle gaffs, the regular type of gaffs that you can get at Magic Shop. And you would need like double facers. You need like a whole deck, because you do need a lot of gaffs. And some of the tricks are very specific to the gaffs you need. For example, there's a trick called Sensation, and you need 16 double facers, and they all need to be, designed in a specific order. So, I mean, technically you can make them yourself by splitting cards and gluing them. I prefer something that's professionally printed, just so it feels right when I'm using it. You don't want to, I don't know, you don't want you to use cards that are falling apart on you. So some of the tricks in this book you will not be able to do. I'm not too sure that anybody has specifically made all the gaffs from this book. I would like to eventually, and I'm slow. I slowly am doing that through my projects, but it'll be a while before I get them all out. I know that much, because some of the gaffs are very specific, and you need a lot of them. So it's not like I can just have a gaff card per deck. Like, I would need to print a special gaff deck. Some of the gaffs you cannot print, but you can make, and there is instructions on how to make some of the gaffs, and some of the gaffs you cannot make. There is a friend of mine in Spain. He has a website called Gimmick Cartes. I'll see if I can type it. Gimmick Cartes. I think if you do a Google search for that term, Gimmick Cartes, which is Spanish for gimmick cards, He has a website, or at least he used to have a website. I don't know if it's still active, but he makes extremely unbelievable quality gaff cards from this book and from just his own invention. Just really clever, very just very crazy stuff. Cards that I cannot even describe what some of these cards do. Some of these cards are able to transform in your hands. Just really unbelievable stuff. Very clever stuff. Um, I hope the website does work. If you Google it, you should be able to find it. If you can't, or if I find that it can't after the stream, I will find that for you guys. And he can also make gaff cards with any deck you want. So if you contact him and you set it up with him, he can make you gaff cards, and they are extremely good quality. I think the price is good. If you are investing in performing a trick professionally and you want to add a piece to your show, you should have the right gaffs built for the deck that you're using in the show. So he's great. Let's see what else. Okay, experiments with a prearranged pack. That's just deck with a prearranged stack. I mean, tricks with a prearranged stack. Experiments with divided cards. Okay, so divided cards are very interesting. I'll show you what a divided card looks like. And I had one printed in my new deck, Emanations. So this is what a divided card looks like. And it's really cool because you can pick it up and show it as a card. If I do it properly, you can pick it up and show it as a card, and then tap it against a glass, do whatever, and then pick it up again and show it as a totally different card. You can also make it transform amongst a group. For example, let's say you have this situation here. This is not something I set up at all. You have the king. You push the king in. You give it a little wave. Now the king is gone from the pack. You can now spread the deck and show that the king is gone. There's a trick. There's a trick using these cards that's been published. I believe the first instance of it, these divided cards, when they're in print, is in 1580s. I believe it's published for the first time in the 1580s. But the first one that I found out this recently, the first one that I saw in print, the earliest one that I saw in print, is from the year 1612 in a book called The Art of Juggling. And it's a pretty cool trick. You have a bunch of kings, but it's actually described a little differently. In that book, he has an ace split with a court card. But anyways, the trick is you could have a bunch of men. You could have the kings and the jacks all together, and then you could have a lady put among them, and they're all fighting over the lady. The lady, you respread it. The lady has vanished. She's totally gone. Where'd she go? She ran away. She's back home inside of the box. You could do miracles like that. Really cool stuff. And you could let the spectators handle the props a lot of the times, as long as you do that in intelligent fashion. So some of the tricks in the book use this type of prop. Again, this is like the coolest thing for me. I've been playing with this a lot. This is my first time, having some of these to play with for myself. So I've been playing with it for like transpositions where half the card is sticking out of the deck, and then, the other card is on top of the deck, and there's a color change, and we turn the deck over. Now they see the card that's sticking out looks like this. Anyways, very very cool stuff. Something that I'm playing with. Uh, I can't wait for you guys to get some of these cards. It's pretty cool. What else is in the trick? So there's a bunch of tricks that rely on this concept of the divided card. Again, some of these you will not be able to perform just because nobody has ever marketed them, and you need quite a few divided cards, and they need to. Then they're pretty specific. And once you read the routine, you'll be like, oh, I understand why I need these cards in this position and split in this way. And nobody has made them yet, unfortunately. I know that Magic Christian has made a set that originally came with like the big Hofzinser book. I don't know what the back design was or if they were, well, good cards. I just feel like if you are going to be actually performing some of this material, you need like permanent access to gaffs, not just like one set, like one gaff that you have to use for the rest of your life. So that probably is why people stay away from this type of material. Gaffs are hard to come across, and people don't make their own gaffs today. Experiments with differently prepared cards. Now, these cards, the differently prepared cards and the transparent cards are totally different process. The transparent card has been released, I think, a few years ago by Theory 11, and they just released it as the Hofzinser card. And honestly, the trick that they released with it, like they had no idea what they were doing. They just were not really interested in a quality product. They just had like a cool idea that they could capture on video, like, oh, there's a candle, we hold the card up to the candle and then we turn it over and it changes, and like but look up Theory 11, look up their Hofzinser cards. You probably can buy them. They are a good product. I'm not knocking the product. The product is, the cards are good. It's just Theory 11 as a company, and I don't know who was behind it. They just didn't know how to use those cards. So even though the gimmick is very well made, you really have to read the book to understand great how to use that card to create a magic effect. And unfortunately, you're not going to get that from Theory 11. Experiments with mechanical apparatus. Oh yeah. This is also a just a crazy amount of work. You can actually. So here's the thing. Even though some of these are like just so difficult to prepare, some of these tricks, if you do study it and you work on it, you actually can make all of these and study the magic and perform these pieces. And I would actually recommend doing that. It is a lot of work. It's an investment of time and energy and everything, but you will be performing magic that nobody else in the world is. Nobody else in the world is going to go through the trouble of making these gaffs. You can literally perform magic from Hofzinser, some of the greatest magic ever created, and you'll be the only one in the world to do it because nobody else is doing it. They just won't go through the effort of making some of these props. And sort of that is how I want to end this. Just give you an overview on the book. This is such a it's such a grand book. I do want to talk about Hofzinser again. It's such a huge topic, Hofzinser, such a mammoth topic. And I just want to give you an overview of the book, sort of give you my thoughts on the book, how to approach it. We will be talking about some of the pieces from Hofzinser. Tomorrow we are, for the Studies of Magic, talking about Hofzinser's the sympathetic numbers, and I'll talk about my experiences with that and how to prepare the pack, even though it's a unprepared trick. I've found little things for myself that make it better for me. Maybe you want to use them, but it's not necessary. It just makes it easier for me personally. Um, so tomorrow we will be talking about that. Again, this is I got this book. Unfortunately, Denny Haney, I didn't know him, but Denny Haney just passed away, and I went down to his magic shop once in Baltimore to just pass through. We were on our way to a magic convention. I actually went there for a lecture as well, um, long time ago. Anyways, he had a big collection of books in the shop. This was at the shop for $40. Maybe it was less than $40. It might have been less. I bought it. And actually, I didn't want to get it at first. One of my friends told me, "Yeah, you should really get this book. It's a great book." And I looked at him like, who the heck is Hofzinser? Like, how? I mean, look at this book. How's this book gonna have good card magic? That's sort of what I was thinking. I didn't know any better, and thankfully, my friend convinced me to buy it. I just paid and bought it. And for a long time, I didn't get it. I really needed to be pointed towards this book. And, like, there's a lot of magic books written, and a lot of the material is garbage. And when I first approached this book, I didn't take it too seriously. It's only in the last few years that I really sort of sat down and have been working through it. Because it is like a riddle to go through. You will not get through this book. You will not realistically get through this book in a month or like 2 months or 3 months. You will have to like sit down and work on each trick for a few weeks. Like this book could easily take you, I don't know, a year, 2 years to go through, and it's not a big book. It's just so dense that you really do have to take time with it. But it is worth it. Find yourself a copy. It's not too expensive, and it really is worth it. It's just a fantastic book. All right, guys, I got to prepare for tomorrow. I will see you all there. Hope you guys enjoy this. Happy New Year. It's a little late to say Happy New Year, but thank you for joining the first live stream of the year. It's great to have you back in 2019. Hope you guys enjoy this. Next month, we will be doing a different book. Haven't decided on which book yet, but I will let you know soon which book we're doing next month. And until then, please buy yourself a book. I think there's a lot of books in Magic that you can skip. This is a book that I wouldn't skip, but I want people in general to ignore it just because it's so good. I kind of want it all to myself, to be honest. But letting you guys know that so that you can take the appropriate course of action. All right, guys, have a good weekend. Have a good day. Have a good night, wherever you are in the world. And I will see you tomorrow in Studies of Magic.